Survival is a habit that some men never break. You ride in, you do the work, you ride out. The Nameless gunman had lived that cycle 100 times. 100 towns, 100 roads. He always kept his eyes toward the north. He never looked back. Leaving was the only thing he was truly good at. Every person he helped became a shadow in his wake. That was the bargain he made with his own soul. It had served him well until a Tuesday in Mill Haven. He had no reason to linger. Scout was watered. The trail north was calling. He was just looking for a plate of breakfast. He was a ghost passing through a town that meant nothing to his future. Then he turned the corner onto the main street. He heard a sound that made him stop. 2 men stood in the dirt. They were large. They moved with the heavy ease of men who expected the world to step aside. They had a woman cornered outside the general store. The talk was low and deliberate. From a distance it might have sounded ordinary. He was not at a distance. He listened for 10 seconds. The woman held a list of supplies.
Her knuckles were white against the paper. Her face was perfectly still. It was not the stillness of peace. It was the look of someone who had been scared so often that the fear had become a chore. He knew that face. He had seen it in a dozen dying towns. It was the face of a person who had stopped praying for help. He did not plan his next move. He did not think about the cost. He simply walked over and stood beside her. He looked at the 2 men with an expression that had ended more conversations than words ever could. They looked at him. They saw the scar. They saw the poncho. They saw the twin holsters. The talk ended right there. They turned and left. The woman did not offer a thank you. She looked at him with a sharp, measuring stare. She was judging him with the speed of a hawk. 3 seconds passed, maybe 4. "Then you are the one they call the Nameless gunman," she said. "I have been called that," he replied. "I have been looking for you. My name is Catherine Aldred. I own the Aldred Ranch, 12 miles south. I need help, the kind the law will not provide." He looked at her. He saw the white knuckles still gripping the list. He saw eyes that were tired and direct. She was not asking for sympathy, just a hand. "Buy me breakfast," he said, "and tell me everything." He did not know it then. He would not be riding north for a very long time. The diner was 2 doors down from the store. It was a small room with a corner table. The coffee was hot and strong. It was exactly what the morning required. Catherine Aldred sat across from him. She spoke with the systematic efficiency of a person who had rehearsed this for weeks. She was not going to waste the opportunity. Her husband Thomas had died 3 years ago. A fever took him. It was sudden. It was the kind of sickness that breaks a strong man in a week and leaves no answers. They had built the Aldred Ranch together. 15 years of hard labor. A growing herd. 6 hands in the peak season. When Thomas died, the neighbors expected her to fold. They thought she would sell out and move away. They expected her to let someone else handle the weight of the range. Catherine Aldred did not sell. That decision had offended the wrong people. Here is a truth about the frontier in 1882. The real slaughter usually starts long before the first shot is fired. A woman could inherit land. A woman could hold the title. The frontier is a clock that only ticks toward midnight, and for a woman alone, the gears turn a little faster. Out here, the machinery of survival, the banks, the cattle markets, the supply lines, was forged by men for men. A woman standing on her own wasn't just an outlier, she was a target. Catherine Aldred found that out the hard way. They didn't move on her at first. They waited a year, expecting the silence of the Aldred Ranch to break her spirit. But the herd held. The ranch hands stayed on out of respect for the widow. That was when the screws began to turn. Credit dried up at the bank. Supply wagons started arriving weeks late. When she took her cattle to market, the prices she was offered wouldn't buy the salt to cure the meat. It was a quiet pressure. A slow, deliberate weight designed to grind a person into the dust. Then the Callaway gang rode into the territory. 12 men who didn't just cause trouble. They practiced violence with a professional's touch. Since their arrival, 3 ranches had already folded. All of them sold to the same shadow company back in St. Louis. Before we see how many graves have to be dug,
Take a moment to join us by subscribing. It's the only way to ensure you're here for the final hand. Nobody in Millhaven could say who owned that land company. To Catherine, the truth was simple. She was the last independent holdout on the South Range. She was the only gap left in a fence someone was trying to close. 6 weeks ago, 4 of the Callaway gang rode onto her dirt.
They gave her 60 days to sell or face the consequences. I looked at her across the breakfast table and did the math. 2 weeks, that was all the time she had left. I asked what happened to the men who sold out. Her eyes went hard. She told me about a Mallister hand who died in an accident no one believed in. I asked why she hadn't gone to the law. The sheriff in Millhaven has grown real fond of his own shadow lately. He's been too busy to look into cut wire or missing steers. He's also riding a fine new horse. He's had it about 6 months, just long enough for the Callaway gang to get comfortable. I set my coffee cup down. I told her I'd need to see the property. Something in her face shifted. It wasn't quite relief. It was the look of a person who had been drowning and finally felt a hand grab her collar. We rode out that afternoon. The 12 miles south of Millhaven told a story the town had been hiding. It was fine country. The grass was green and the water was deep. The Aldred Ranch looked like a place built with a man's pride and a woman's care. But I wasn't looking at the view. I noticed the water trough had been moved. The barn doors were set to swing outward. Up on the North Range, I saw 3 fence posts made of fresh timber. They were set at odd angles in the old holes. Someone had been here. Someone had been walking this land, measuring distances and checking lines of sight. The Callaway gang was already sizing up the battlefield. I didn't say a word. I just filed the details away. That evening, back at the kitchen table, I told Catherine exactly what I'd found. She didn't say a word. She just listened. A man's past is a debt that always comes due. Sometimes it is paid in coin. More often, it is paid in blood. I am your narrator, and we are back on the killing fields of the American frontier. We find ourselves at the Aldred Ranch, where the air tastes of impending storms and old regrets. She looked at him across the flickering light of a dying lamp. They have been here twice that I know of, Catherine Aldred said. Likely more when I was not looking. The nameless gunman leaned back. He did not watch her. He watched the shadows. Tell me about the man who did the talking, he said. The one from 6 weeks ago. Catherine paused to find the words. He was precise, she said. Every word he spoke had a purpose. He said exactly what he meant and nothing more. It sounded like a speech he had delivered a dozen times before. The stranger nodded. That was the man he needed to understand. He asked her questions for a full hour. By the time they finished, the fire had burned down to glowing red teeth. Without a conscious choice, they had moved from the kitchen table. They now sat in the heavy chairs beside the hearth. Before we see whose blood waters this land, make sure you are riding with us for the long trail. Subscribe to the channel. Let us finish this walk together. The conversation had shifted without any formal announcement. They stopped talking about the Callaway gang and the looming deadline. They talked about Thomas. They talked about the ranch. She spoke of the heavy weight of building a life alone. It was a world meant for 2 sets of hands. The nameless gunman did not say much. What he did offer was specific and measured. Catherine noticed the weight of his words. He caught himself noticing her observation. He stood, bid her a short good night, and retreated to the spare room. The next morning, the stranger rode Scout back into Millhaven. He needed the kind of truth you do not find at a dinner table. The Callaway gang had a reputation that preceded them. 12 men, organized, a clear chain of command. The precise man Catherine had described had a name in the local saloons. Crane. Not a first name, not a surname, just Crane. Some men accumulate single names that function as both an identity and a funeral shroud. Crane was 40 years old. He was lean and dark-eyed. He moved with the bearing of a man who found violence functional rather than interesting. He did not fight if he could use fear instead.
He did not use noise to intimidate. He used the quiet of a man who has nothing to prove. He was the most dangerous type of professional. He had survived long enough to become methodical. But Millhaven knew one more thing about him. It was a story told in low voices by those who had seen the aftermath. The Mallister hand who died 6 months back. The one they called an accident. Crane had been there that day. He had been alone with the man, up close, personal. It was the kind of work a man does when he wants the message to be undeniable. That was the ghost, coming to the Aldred Ranch in 2 weeks. The stranger sent a telegram to a contact in a federal land office. The reply arrived on the 4th day. The land company in St. Louis was a shell. It was owned by 2 corporations. Those were owned by a consortium of railroad investors. They did not want the dirt. They wanted the South Range water rights. Without that water, the North Range operations would wither and die in a drought. And the territory was long overdue for a dry year. That evening he sat on the porch with Catherine. He told her about the water and the men in St. Louis. She remained silent for a long time. The only sound was the creak of the boards beneath them. Thomas knew, she whispered finally. He used to talk about it. He said whoever controlled the Aldred water controlled the whole South Range. He called it a responsibility. It is both, the stranger said. He stared out at the darkening horizon. He would have hated what they are doing with it. Most men who build things hate what happens to them after they are gone. Catherine looked at him then. She said something he had not expected. He had sat on many porches in many dusty towns. He had heard the question of why he did what he did more times than he could count. This time, the answer felt different. Most men trade in the leanest truths possible. It is a way to stay guarded. That evening, I found myself offering Catherine Aldred more than was necessary. It wasn't that she pried. It was the specific quality of her silence. Her listening made the extra words feel like the right amount. I should have recognized that for what it was. I wasn't paying attention. On the morning of the 5th day, I rode out to find Crane. I did not head toward the base of the Callaway gang. Instead, I read the tracks from the 3 properties that had already sold. I followed that trail northwest. Scout's ears twitched before the draw even came into view. 12 men sat below, disciplined and organized. It was the kind of camp that told you these men were dangerous. Their layout was professional. Crane sat apart from the others. He had his own small fire and was reading a book. I rode down into the draw. The camp went alert the moment I crested the ridge. Hands moved toward steel. Positions shifted. It was the automatic response of men who killed for a living. I kept Scout at a walk. I wanted them to see I was neither surprised nor concerned. I stopped 20 feet from Crane's fire. He looked up from his page. He studied me with dark, methodical eyes. His assessment took about 3 seconds. "The Nameless Gunman," Crane said. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man confirming a report. "You know why I'm here?" I said. He nodded. "The Aldred woman hired you." "She did." To my right, one of his men shifted his weight. His hand moved 3 inches toward his holster. My right Colt was out before he finished the motion. I didn't point it at him. I held it at my side, barrel toward the dirt. The message was in the speed, not the aim. The camp went deathly still. "Tell him to stop," I told Crane. Crane made a simple gesture. The man froze. I showed them the left Colt, clearing the leather just as fast. Crane watched this with the look of a man recalculating his odds. A long silence followed. "I'll deliver the message," Crane said finally. "What happens after isn't my decision." I told him I knew that. But the message mattered. Whoever hired them needed to understand the 11th day. I told him they had just seen a part of it. I spent the remaining days preparing the Aldred Ranch. I studied every approach and every angle. I looked for every position of advantage. I placed Gus at the North Range fence line. I put Paul in the barn loft. Catherine stayed in the house. She looked like someone who had been told to stay back but had decided to make her own rules. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with Catherine Aldred. We talked about Thomas and the ranch. We talked about what came next. She spoke of the future with certainty. She wasn't hoping for it. She was planning it. On the 8th day, she found me in the barn. I was checking Scout's legs. "I looked you up," she said. She had asked around Mill Haven. She told me nobody knew my name. Nobody knew where I came from. To the world, I had no history before the towns where I was seen. I said nothing to that. "Doesn't that bother you?" she asked, "being nobody's history?" I took a moment to think on it. "I'm somebody's history," I said, "just not anybody who is looking for me." She looked at me then. "Mine," she said simply. Then she walked back to the house. There are people who talk about what they've built, and there are people who talk about what they've survived. In my experience, hope and desperation are usually the same story told from two different sides. Catherine Aldred was whispering both at once. I found myself listening with a focus a man in my trade probably shouldn't possess. They didn't wait for the deadline. The shadows were still long when they arrived, 3 days early, hunting for blood. Scout knew before any of us. His ears twitched in the corral, catching a scent carried on the morning breeze. 30 seconds later, the first silhouette broke the horizon on the north ridge. 12 riders approached from the northwest. They moved with the same predatory logic they had used on every other ranch. 8 men came from the north. 4 swung around from the west. It was a classic pincer, meant to crush anything in the middle. I stood in the yard of the Aldred ranch. The weight of both Colts felt familiar and heavy in my holsters. Scout moved to the fence without a word from me. He took the left side. He was an animal that had seen enough gunfights to pick his own angles. The north group approached at a steady trot. They spread out with the professional spacing of men who practiced for a living. I let them reach the yard, then I drew. The lead rider spurred his horse and fired. I wasn't there anymore. A reflexive step to the left, a shift of weight, and my right Colt spoke before his echo died. 1. 2 more riders from the north tried to flank me. They expected a target. What they didn't expect was Scout. The horse threw his weight against the fence rail. The timber swung wide, catching the leftmost rider's horse mid-stride. The beast stumbled. The rider's shot went wild into the dirt. My left Colt found its mark. 2. The remaining 5 from the north pulled their reins tight. They weren't running. They were reassessing. I pivoted toward the west. Those 4 had stayed back, waiting for the north group to occupy my lead. It was a smart move, but they hadn't accounted for Gus. From the north fence line, he had a clear sight line to the west approach. He fired just as I pivoted. He didn't aim for the men. He fired into the dirt of the lead horse's hooves. The crack of the shot and the spray of earth made the beast rear. The tight formation shattered. In that single second of chaos, I fired twice. I took the 2 who had recovered fastest. They were the most dangerous of the 4. 3. 4. The last 2 riders looked at the bodies and then at each other. They arrived at the same answer at the same time. They turned their horses and fled. 4 men lay dead in the yard. It had taken less than 30 seconds. 5 riders still sat their horses in the yard, and behind them stood Crane. He was the leader of the Callaway gang. He sat at the back, directing rather than executing. He hadn't even drawn his weapon. He just watched with dark, methodical eyes, running the numbers in his head. "How many rounds do you have left?" Crane asked. He sounded professional, conversational. "Enough," I told him. "For 5? Crane asked. "Step up and find out," I said. A long silence stretched between us. Crane looked at the 4 men on the ground. He looked at the 2 who had ridden away. He looked at my face, which hadn't changed since the first shot. "This job," Crane said, "has stopped being worth the contract." He pulled his horse around. The 5 men with him followed. He stood in the silence until the drum of hooves vanished into the pre-dawn shadows. His hands moved with practiced habit, sliding fresh lead into both Colts. Scout drifted across the yard and settled beside him. The horse's shoulder felt warm against his arm. Catherine stepped out from the house. She surveyed the dirt, then turned her gaze toward him.
Her face showed the slow unraveling of a knot held too tight for too long. "Is it over?" she asked. "Crane is finished," he replied. "Now it is up to his masters to decide if they want more blood." The federal investigator reached Millhaven 4 days after the powder smoke cleared. He was a sharp-edged man in a fine coat. He had been chasing the railroad consortium from the St. Louis end. He only needed the specific proof from the telegram to close the trap. The land company's acquisition was halted pending a full inquiry. 3 properties were flagged for review. The water rights were frozen tight. But the Aldred Ranch remained untouched. The gunman lingered for 2 more sons. The contract did not demand it. The job was done. He stayed because the trail north could wait. He stopped lying to himself about what was pulling at him. On that final evening, they walked the property lines together. It was the same path he took on his first day. But the ground felt different when he wasn't looking for kill zones. At the north fence, the light was dying over the country she owned. "It is good land," he noted. She agreed. "Thomas knew the soil," she said. "We both did." He looked at her. "Yes," he replied, "you did." She met his eyes then. It was a moment that didn't need a herald. "Stay," she said. It was a simple offer. It came from someone who knew the answer might be no. The south pasture was sinking into the dark. The barn Thomas built stood like a solid monument in the shadows. He was silent so long it became its own heavy truth. It wasn't the answer she wanted. It wasn't the one he liked giving. He was just a man who had never stayed anywhere. "I don't stay," he finally said. "There are places that need what I do. I am the only one who does it this way." She nodded gently. She made it easier for him than he deserved. "I know," she whispered. He looked at the fence she had extended with her own hands. "I will come back," he said. She watched him for a long moment. "Do not say those words unless you mean them." "I mean them," he replied. She gave him that same sharp nod from the morning in Millhaven, the morning she decided he was the right man for the job. They walked back to the house in the cool air. He was gone before the sun. In the dark barn, he cinched the saddle on Scout by feel. The horse read the rhythm of leaving with practiced attention. He led the animal into the yard. He looked up at the second floor. A lamp flickered in her window. She knew he would go before the light came. She had lit the flame anyway. He held his gaze on the window for a long breath. Then he climbed into the saddle, felt Scout's heat beneath him, and turned north. "I have walked away from more towns than I have names for. I usually do it the only way I know how. I move forward, and I do not look back. This time, the grit felt different. I reached the crest of the first rise and pulled the reins. Below me, the Aldred Ranch was a ghost in the pre-dawn shadows. One square of yellow light burned in an upper floor. I looked at it once, then I put my back to it. There were other places that needed my particular trade, but I had given Catherine Aldred a promise. I told her I would return. Most words I speak are just wind. That one I intended to keep like gospel. Scout pushed north. That lit window sank behind the ridge and vanished. The next trouble was waiting. It always is. But for the first time in an age, there was something south worth riding back for. 5 stories are etched into the map now. The white heat of Dust Creek at noon, a lone horse in the desert, Cold Creek, Dodge City, and a ranch 12 miles south of Millhaven. A widow hired a nameless gunman to hold her dirt, and she got more than she bid for. I reckon I did too. Before we reach the end of this track, tell me something. Where are you bedding down tonight while you listen to this? Put your country in the comments. I want to see how far these hoofprints go. And if you have more miles left in you, the last story is waiting on your screen right now. I will see you on the trail.